This is the Roots and All podcast, and I'm your host, Sarah Wilson. Join me as I talk about all aspects of gardening with some of the top horticulturists from around the world. This week, I'm joined once again by Amanda Edmiston of Botanica Fabula to talk about her work and her latest book, a collection of folklore, social history, family memories, and the enduring stories of plants. We explore why these everyday tales matter, how so much knowledge is quietly passed from generation to generation, and why now feels like the perfect time to start asking the people around us about the plants and traditions they remember.
I feel quite privileged because I'm aware you don't often have repeat offenders on the show, but it felt important to come and talk to you again, really, because as I just mentioned, you kind of had this initiating force in that we were talking about a project that I'd been working on that was almost a lockdown project. I'd encountered the work of Elizabeth Blackwell at the Royal College of Physicians and Surgeons in Glasgow. She was the first woman to publish a Herbal, and she was from my hometown of Aberdeen. Her work went out in 1737, and she'd painted and written about 500 different plants, spanning hedgerow, wild plants, nettles, dandelions, the sort of everyday hedgerow plants we're all familiar with, through the physic garden kind of cultivars, the lemon balm, the rosemary, the sage, and then had also covered things like tamarind and cacao and coffee and turmeric and plants that were coming in the 18th century with the plant collectors. And she'd worked at Chelsea Physic Garden with the mentorship of Sir Hans Sloane. So it was all really interesting, and I'd elected to go and look at different legends and fairy tales and bits of folklore that were kind of accompanied each of the plants, and a bit of the social history, a bit of the correlation with modern herbal practices, modern gardening, how these plants had come into the country, that sort of thing, and just work with each and every one. And I'd spoken to you and you'd said, that sounds like a book. And I'd said, I love it to be a book. I would really love to write a book. I guess I had this childhood dream, I think, becoming a writer where, I sat under some kind of heritage apple tree with my Remington typewriter, tapping away on the keys and producing sort of beautiful books. And probably 20 years before I actually did, maybe accompanied by a beehive and some adorable children behaving like something out of Enid Blyton, and a well-behaved dog and a pleasant cat. And actually what happened was, I ended up with a chaotic lockdown project of moving house several times with two children who are not in any way, shape or form possessed by demons, and an unruly spaniel, and a freelance acting partner, and, several different house moves, typing frenziedly on a laptop that kept shutting down, but started to write the very curious Herbal project. And then you said it should become a book. I sort of put word out there, if you like, that I might be up for a book. Nobody sort of bit the bait, if you like. And then I was putting it out on social media because I knew that people were enjoying what I was doing. And a wonderful editor from a small independent publishers came out to me and said, we would love you to write a book. Have you got a book? And I didn't know what to do. And everyone was doing seasonal wheels at the time. She was like, pick a theme. And I'm like, I am not doing a seasonal wheel. I mean, I love a seasonal wheel as much as the next plant fanatic, but it didn't feel like me. And I thought, oh, actually, maybe I go beyond this one person, this one woman in the 18th century, and look at all the stories going back in time, of which, I had loads at this point. So I'd been a professional storyteller, herbal storyteller, as I call it, for 12 years at the time. And I suggested that we time traveled. And so in 2023, the Time Traveller's Herbal came out, which goes from 3,000, 5,000 BC. I don't know. I'll have to look at my own book to double check. See, I always say that story is 5,000 years old, so it would be like 3,000 BC. Maths is not my strong suit.
It's all right. You've got other strengths.
I've got other strengths. It is not maths. Yeah, no, it's 5,000 BC. Yeah, good. That's all right. I should know my own stuff. As soon as I'm talking about something else, I forget the other bits. Yeah, so book one came out 2023, and then because it felt like time sped up, so you get to like the end of the 18th century, the 1800s, and because how we work with plants changed, and because we start to formulate and market medicines, it felt like the whole social history of herbal medicine changed and shifted. And with the Industrial Revolution, people were traveling a lot more. And it also felt like gardenings and gardens shifted completely. They changed what they looked like. Women's part in formal gardens and things shifted and changed. The world wars happened, and then I was just like, this is a different book. So I ended the first one in 1800, and then a couple of weeks ago, Collected Curiosities came out, which is standalone, but also picks up where Time Traveller's Herbal finishes. That's quite a lot, isn't it? What else have I been doing? I went to Poland. I made an episode for a TV series for Poland, and then went out to Poland. I've done some storytelling up in the Hudson Valley in upstate New York. Gosh, quite a lot.
That is a lot. That is a lot. You're putting everyone else to shame. Well done.
I don't know about that.
I feel like your latest book kind of defies description, and that's what I really like about it. But can you try and describe it? Because it's so multi-layered that it's not really one thing and it's not another. But what would you say if you had to kind of describe?
Yeah, and I think that's probably touching on quite a good point, in that one of the reasons I don't think I was published sooner is because I don't fit into a genre, and publishers do like to know what they're dealing with. And the same goes with getting an agent. They're like, what do you write? And I'm like, well. So I think the best way to describe it is that I have been a professional storyteller for nearly 20 years now. My background is in herbal medicine. I grew up in a family of artists, writers, plant people, and there is a really strong thread of working with plants in some way running through my family. So plants have always been there in my life. And as a storyteller, I've worked intergenerationally a lot. So I gather stories about plants and how people work with them everywhere I go, whenever I'm working. My ears are attuned to people's, memories of. I got one the other day that was fab, about crab apples being used to mark where roads entered towns, especially in the northeast of England, that they were sort of gateway markers. So the books, I feel, take not only this historic look at plants, a social history, really. I'm not massively intrigued in kings and queens and, international shifts in politics. I like the minutiae, the everyday, the kitchen table kind of memories of, how people's families worked with plants and, preserving, or little rituals and traditions, and the role that plants have like that. So it blends social history, folklore, love a bit of folklore, especially the bits that are really easy for people to remember, that have a bit of fact based in them. The traditional herbal use, and I do share recipes, some of them extraordinary, like in the first book, Time Traveller's Herbal, was a recipe from the 17th century that I found in the archive at the Ashmolean Museum for a lotion to help you see the fae. So basically, it makes a lovely hand lotion, but it's also apparently helps you see the fairies. But I also blend, my ground's favourite ginger cake and hair rinses and teas for enhancing your memory, with a little look at fairy tales. I don't deep dive into many of the legends and folk tales, but I cover them briefly, or in the case of some of them, I do share them more fully. So yeah, social history, folklore, herbal medicine, both the modern and the historic. You're right, it's really difficult to define. And
really
a lot of it is hung together with my own personal experience and journey, because I really wanted to help people feel like they take that magic of a live storytelling session where you feel really immersed. And because my live sessions, I share the scents, I share the plants. We look at the plants and where they grow as I'm working. I wanted to bring some of that slightly immersive engaged feel. So, and because I really feel when I'm walking around and I'm collecting stories, especially when I'm in wild places or beautiful gardens, I feel like I sense the past. It's almost like it's there. And when I'm aware of the history and the fairy tales, I almost feel like it's just within reach. And I could, if I just like squinted my eyes and peered round a corner, I might catch that historic figure or that unearthly supernatural being. Do you know what I mean? Hovering amongst the valerian. And I want the readers, hopefully, to make those teas, those cakes, those lotions, and then feel like they're coming on this time traveling journey with me. So there is a little bit of my own autobiographical stuff, and some things like finding those recipes or discovering the stories, looking back on them, they feel like they're made up, like they're incredible experiences of their own. So even though they're kind of everyday, I wanted to share that I had this really strange small experience, because I think we all have those small like magical experiences, and we don't necessarily see them as like wonderful and magical until we look back at them. And I hope that people read what my stories are and then go, oh, I do that too, and I remember that day and it was beautiful, and I've seen and heard this, you know. So I want it to be a sort of shared experience.
Yeah, it is. And I think, like you said, it sparks things, because there's sort of two things that struck me reading it. One is that probably we all do lots of things that we don't even realise that have been passed down to us, so we just do as habit. And the other thing was, it resonated with me because I still am very lucky to have my nan alive, and she's 99, and her mum was Romany. And you've got Romany heritage. And I thought to myself, you know, there's probably a lot of things that I do and say. And I also knew my great nan. You know, I was really lucky to have her growing up. So I would have kind of absorbed stuff from her. But what it did make me think was, actually, I really ought to ask my nan sort of specific things. And she's also in a residential home now. And there's loads of other people in there with all these kind of rich histories. And I thought, I never really sort of speak to them about plants. I might talk to them about what their gardens look like when they maybe were sort of 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s. But I never go to them, what did your mum do? Or what did your dad do that you can kind of remember? And I think that would be a very interesting conversation. And actually, I think there's a kind of duty for us as gardeners to try and extract those stories.
Yeah, and I think you've got the perfect tool there, because you work with plants. You can take in, I mean, I worked on a project working in care homes for about 5 years, Living Voices, and the stories, the poems, the songs, but also the little sayings. And there are a lot of sayings about plant and weather and the land and things like that stay with you longer than almost anything else. There's a rhythm and cadence to those sayings. And if you take in a beautiful bowl of roses and that smell and some peppermint tea and the tastes, and you've got all those sensory elements playing into it, people will start chatting, you know, taking a bit of homemade bramble jelly, and you've suddenly got a conversation, and people will share incredible things. And we may not see it as groundbreaking and life-changing, but actually, I mean, I tell a little bit about Florence Marion McNeill in both books, but she comes up more in the second one. And she worked at the beginning of the 20th century collecting memories of food, not specifically just plants, but recipes with folklore and literature and poetry attached in the Scots kitchen, because she felt like the world was changing and that these things were going to fall away. And so she wanted to gather them and sort of save them a little bit. And I think the world is shifting again with current technology and things like that. And I think that we do have a duty to gather some of those memories. And I think that the question of the Romany heritage thing, it was my maternal grandmother, who has now gone, but feel lucky enough to have spent a lot of time with her and have met my great-grandparents as well, similar to you. And my great-granddad was Romany, and then worked to buy his own bit of land and plant cherry trees, and then ended up with a cherry farm, which I'm fortunate enough that I had enough crossover that I visited. But again, like you, I couldn't isolate what I knew from which department, if you like. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And I went back down to Worcester to try and speak to some of my great aunties, and uncles who were still alive and see what other memories I could get. And the thing with the Romany heritage, and I worked with a lovely Scottish traveller writer, Jess Smith, for a couple of years. She mentored me, and I went up to speak to Jess about the traveller and the Romany stories. And I said, I can't absolutely say these are 100% historically accurate, but I do frame it like I'm a storyteller. And some of it's true and some of it is based on information. Do you know, it's informed storytelling. And, you know, the Worcester, there is a lot of traveller heritage in Worcester, and some of it's easy to get and some of it's not. But as Jess says, whether or not it was Romany or traveller information, it was quite often hidden to keep people safe because, you know, there were ostracised and children were taken and put into schools and a lot went on. And so basically people learned to keep stum and not say anything. And then during World War II, a lot of the reminiscent stuff I've collected, people said quite a lot that like foraging or turning to hedgerow medicines and things like that became associated with poverty. So that people didn't necessarily do it because they wanted to look like they could manage without in some areas. And that bit of knowledge or the commonality, do you know what I mean, kind of gets brought down a notch or two. So I really think, yeah, please do. I would love to hear what you find out as well. Because, I mean, having your nana when she's in her late 90s, it's just a really lovely thing. And
yeah,
the stories you'll hear. Honestly, I can't recommend it enough. It's such a good thing to do.
Well, she loves regaling us with all sorts, but I will ask her specifically about plants because it's not something I've kind of really thought about. But yeah, I will definitely share them if I get any. But the other thing about the book, you do it really subtly, so people probably aren't going to pick up on it as a deliberate thing, but I think probably it was. And that is that you sort of weave through these lost words, which is just a fabulous way of keeping them going, isn't it?
Yeah, and I don't actually know if it was deliberate, but I probably have to confess it wasn't. It's possibly just something I do. That said, though, I did create a workshop for a film company, Retrovisier, with Hannah Papsek, who has directed Lost for Words, which worked with Jackie Morris and Rob McFarlane's book and Spell Songs, the group, and beautiful visuals of the Scottish countryside. So I get mentioned for being a consultant on the first film that's just won a couple of documentary awards because of stuff I'd said about working with children and how they relate to the natural environment and what they remember, because that's been such a huge part of my work for 20 years. And then they asked me to create a workshop. So I filmed a workshop with them that I think might be out this year or early next. I'm not entirely sure they've got a release date, but it's going to be available for schools and people to work with through, I think, the National Museums of Scotland and the Royal Botanic Gardens in Edinburgh. I can't tell you any more about that, but I am very aware of the changing shift in language. I mean, when I work with older schools, high school children, I usually get them out almost playing. Do you know what I mean? It's like things like, it's giving them permission to go out and throw. I mean, I have been told off by teachers for getting them all throwing sticky willies at each other. And we try and call them cleavers, but it doesn't work because there's at least 2 children know what they're actually called. And 14-year-olds think throwing sticky willies at each other is hilarious. And I think they should. Do you know what I mean? But also making simple teas and making up poetry or word patterns and things like that to identify, you know, stretches of river and different rocks and the plants that grow there and which plants like what habitat. And so I kind of think that language and keeping that alive is quite important to me. So it probably does creep in, even though it wasn't an actual decision. And also my granddad was so into telling me folk names. And when we went on days out and things, he would always come equipped with a book of place names and their meanings. There was a similar one with folk names of plants. And so I probably grew up with quite a widespread knowledge of crazy Anglo-Saxon meanings of place names and slightly unexpected folk names for plants.
Well, that's
and
very
it kind
cool.
of stays with you, that stuff. You can't,
It
you know,
does, yeah.
that's it. It's there.
It does. It really does. Yeah. Once it gets in, you don't know where you've picked these things up from necessarily, but they're definitely in there. And then, I think you censor it a little bit as you get older because, there's lots of things that I would say that were kind of phrases that if I say to people now, they just look at me like I'm lost the plot, really. So it's a shame.
Yeah,
We do
totally.
we homogenise our language and stuff to kind of fit in and be understood, but actually it's at the detriment of the richness of our kind of language.
It is, and I'm really pleased. Thank you so much for discovering I did that. I didn't know. I'm quite thrilled about that.
Yeah, well done.
I think it also comes from working because I had probably had toured China when I spoke to you last. But I did a few weeks working in schools and universities in China, telling plant stories. And because there were people learning English as a second language, and most of them had a very, very good grasp of English. But when I'm working with people who English isn't their first language, I find it really useful if you use lots of different words meaning the same thing, whether it's simile, metaphor, synonyms, any of them. But I quite often multi-layered describe things, which is, I guess, what I do when I'm writing with the folklore and the recipes and the stories and history, is I find that layers mean that it reaches more people because one of them will resonate with somebody. Do you know what I mean? So you've got more chance of it all working.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I've never thought of that. But yeah, giving it sort of multiple meaning. Yeah, absolutely get that. You mention a kind of a practice that you could do in the book, which I thought was very thought-provoking. And I thought I might ask you the question and put you on the spot. And that is, you said to kind of take a moment and consider that if you had to leave your home and start a new life, what seeds would you take with you? Which I thought was just a brilliant thing to think about.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting one. And I had a conversation with another author yesterday about this because I asked her a similar question. Well, I didn't ask her quite that, but I was asking her about traveling with seeds, and she said something that is definitely true for me, which is the reality of it is I might just grab a tin that's got the seeds that I have in it, and that is probably quite a good cross section of things that I would like. But to this point of the year, as you no doubt you will completely understand, it probably hasn't got all the things I like in it because most of the things that I like haven't gone to seed yet, or, the seeds aren't at that point. I'd end up with the foxgloves that didn't go in and the spare lettuce that I'm not terribly keen on that's been sat around for a while. So what would I actually take? I would take St. John's wort, partially because it's one of my favourite herbs. I like the fact it's wound healing. I like the fact that it's antidepressant. I love the fact that it goes purple when you squish it. I love the yellowness. I like a weed in the best sense of the word. If it's really tenacious and it'll grow most places, then I'm quite happy with it. So I like Hypericum perforatum for that reason. I would hope that some dandelions and thistles, despite the fact that they may be impractical, apart from in the wildest corners of gardens where people are trying to keep a sense of balance and equilibrium. But I would hope there were some thistles and dandelions, and the odd cleaver could come in. I don't mind because I harvest them that much. They're so good for lymph drainage. They're so good for throwing at relatives, but they need to come. Probably some of the small trees, rowan, elderberry, hawthorn, probably a crabapple. And I would want there to be rosemary. Rosemary would have to come, and sage. Oh, so many. We're going to have a whole garden full. And then a couple of decorative things. I mean, I'm very, very fond of things like violets and nasturtiums that you can also eat. And I can't be done without a small pot of pink, because Felicia and the pot of pinks was one of my favourite stories when I was little. And I need some nettles. I don't know a lot. I did move a year ago, and we've got a rowan, an elderberry, a hawthorn, a crabapple, and melissa, lemon balm, and yarrow, achillea, and some of the artemisias. I really like artemisias. I mean, love wormwood and mugwort. Southernwood I'm not keen on, possibly because it doesn't grow for me as well as I'd like it to. Yeah, I've got a whole garden going on.
You have? Yeah.
Sorry.
Well, that's all right. I mean, you're going to need a removal van just for your seeds at this rate, but... Thanks to Amanda for sharing her stories and insights. If you enjoyed today's episode, you might also like episode 104, Botanical Storytelling with Amanda Edmiston, where Amanda first joined me to explore the art of botanical storytelling, and episode 347, Can Plants Help You Find Lost Things?, which delves into the folklore and magic surrounding plants. You'll find links to both in the show notes, and as always, thank you for listening. Next up is Benny with his insect of the week.
The sieve-winged snailkiller. Scientific name, Corimacera marginata. So, my insect of the week this week is a snail-killing fly. Such a badass group of flies. The sieve-winged snailkiller is one of the most striking ones and one of the slightly easier to identify ones, and I recently encountered it. So it's part of a family of the Siomyzidae, the snail killers, and we have about 72 species on the UK list alone. So pretty mad stuff. The etymology of the scientific name, Corimacera, comes from ancient Greek, from chorus, meaning bed bug, so I don't know how they ended up with that, but I'm assuming it's an old classification. The second word, marginata, comes from Latin, meaning margined, and that's to do with the wing, which has a dark band on the outside of it. That one's quite helpful. The first part, the genus, slightly confusing, but that is sometimes the case. So 72 species of this type of fly in the UK. The adults lay eggs on snails, either on them or nearby, and then what happens is the larvae then will go for the snail, the living snail. So, good bit of terminology is parasitoid. Parasitoid, oides meaning similar to or like in Greek, so it's like a parasite. And the difference is parasitoids kill the host. Parasites don't usually kill the host, they usually kind of drain the host. But parasitoids, a lot of wasps and flies, they'll kill the host. So the snails in this particular species are terrestrial snails, land snails, but some of the flies use only aquatic snails. So different species and different genera, some of them using land snails, some of them using aquatic snails. This one today is using land snails. And what happens is the adult will lay the eggs on or near the host, and then upon hatching, the larva feeds on the living snail. The host will survive up to 10 days whilst it's being devoured, which is pretty mad. Sometimes they can be infected with multiple larvae. They've seen up to 11 larvae on one snail, which is also pretty mad. And the larvae then start to feed on the decomposing tissue after the snail has finally died. And then they move on to a second snail. Now, the second snail's fate is a bit shorter, just a few days. And it's very rare for them to go on to a third snail. Usually after 2 snails, they've had enough. That's enough for them to have developed and to pupate. So the pupation occurs outside of the shell, according to a scientific paper I read. So pretty mad, pretty brutal if you're a snail being eaten alive by a fly larvae or larva. This is a species that you can see anywhere in the UK and Ireland, really, but more common in the southern half, scarcer as you move up north. Who knows? In the future, that might change. I think a really important message comes out of this because snails are very maligned in horticulture. It shows you the ecological function, shows you how important they are. Even bees nest in snail shells. So there's at least 3 species of bee in the UK at the minute that nest in snail shells. Here we've got a group of flies, 72 species strong, that relies on different types of snail as part of their development. So snails are doing all sorts of important things, not just being a food source or a habitat source. we should look at them in a different light. So, as always, if you have seen a snail killing fly, please do let me know. Please do record on the apps I record on iNaturalist.
You can download or listen to the podcast direct from the website rootsandall.co.uk. Please also check out my Patreon, where you can make a one-off donation or take out a monthly subscription to help support the podcast. Because if you enjoy the show, please help it continue. I also have a GoFundMe where you can make a one-off donation. Even a one-off donation of £1 helps, and I'll be really grateful for your support. So please go to Patreon or GoFundMe and search for Roots and All Podcast.